So I feel grateful that recently I had the chance to give some online talks on the text, The 7-Point Mind Training by Geshe Chikawa. So I found this experience really helpful, good for me, because I had to review the teachings and then think about them in order to prepare for the talks. So it made my mind more familiar with these wonderful ideas and practices in the text and its commentaries. And the text is actually quite short and contains a lot of one-liners, not comedy or political one-liners, but Dharma one-liners, advice on how to put the Dharma teachings into practice in our daily life. And some contemporary teachers call them slogans, but we have to remember they are mind training slogans, not advertising ones. And Shambhala Publishing Company even printed them on cards, a set of cards with one of these mind training slogans on each card with some commentary on the back from Venerable Pema Chodron. So one of the lines from the text that really stood out for me, almost like a neon sign grabbing my attention, is this one. Always maintain only a joyful mind. And I think the reason that it grabs me is because it's so challenging for me. For most of my life, as far back as I can remember, it seems that my default mode has been to have an unhappy mind, a non-joyful mind. And this used to puzzle me when I was a child. I would look at other kids and they looked so happy and carefree, and I'd be so unhappy, and I'd think, why are they so happy and why am I not happy? How come? Is it God? Did God make me this way? But why? It doesn't seem fair. So it was only much later when I started learning Buddhism, I learned that it was me and not God who was responsible for the state of my mind. And at first, that just made me more unhappy because it seemed like it was my fault. There was something wrong with me. I was a bad person that my mind was so unhappy. But I gradually came to understand that wasn't the right understanding. And so it's not that it's one's own fault if you're unhappy, but you just don't know how to manage the mind. So I just didn't know how to stop my mind from getting carried away with negative ways of thinking and how to change that into more positive ways of thinking. So this is actually a huge topic. And in fact, I've sometimes heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama say that this is the essence of Buddhism. The essence of Buddhism is really about how to work with our mind, how to transform our mind, to have fewer negative, unhappy, disturbing thoughts and emotions, and how to have more positive ones. So really the whole Dharma is all about this. So I'm not going to cover all of that today. I'll talk a little bit today, and then in future BBCs talk a bit more about it. So I think an important first step is, if you do find that your mind is not joyful, not happy, is to figure out why. What's going on inside the mind? What's my mind doing? What's my mind saying? And the first answer that might come up is blaming somebody else or blaming external conditions. Somebody did such and such, or they said such and such, and I'm really pissed off about that, or really hurt about that. Or they ran out of I didn't get the kind of food that I like for lunch, or they ran out of my favorite kind of sandwich at the deli. Or the weather, it's too hot or too cold or too dark and rainy. Of course, it's natural to be unhappy when problems happen or we face unwanted situations, especially other people doing things or saying things. But do we have to react that way? Is that like no choice, but I have to be unhappy about that? Does everyone react in that way? I remember reading a couple of stories that really struck me. One was during the Iraq War. There was a young girl, just a teenager, And she was injured when bombs fell near her house. And I guess she had really horrible burns on her body. But it took about a week or 10 days before she was actually able to go to a hospital and get medical treatment. I think some American soldiers, picked her up and brought her to a hospital. So for 10 days, she'd been living with these injuries, burns, I mean, incredible pain. But they said she was fairly calm and peaceful and happy and positive. And I kind of thought, wow. I mean, I kind of imagined myself in that situation and I'd be miserable and grumpy. So there are stories like that of people who just have some natural, even children, natural ability to put up with difficulties without getting upset about them. So there's a choice. It isn't that everybody reacts in the same way with unhappiness or negativity when problems happen. And even if it's some kind of major situation like that one I just mentioned, like sickness or pain or the loss of a loved one, we may think, well, there's no choice except to be unhappy. Unhappy thoughts or even angry thoughts and feelings just flood our minds, and we think we just have to go along with them. There's no choice. But what I've learned is that's not true. There is a choice, because we are not our thoughts and our feelings. These are just transitory mental states that come and go in our mind due to causes and conditions, and they're like clouds in the sky. They're not always there. They come and they go. They are not who we are. And we don't have to be completely caught up in them. I once heard another Dharma practitioner use the term hijack when referring to her mind. She talked about how her mind would get hijacked by delusions or afflictive emotions. And I really like that term. I thought that's a good analogy. But the funny thing is that the disturbing thoughts and emotions don't have weapons that they are threatening us with. So it's not like we're being, threatened to be injured or killed. It's simply because we haven't learned how to deal with these thoughts and emotions, how to do something different with our mind. But the wonderful thing is that we do have a choice. We don't have to let our mind get hijacked. We can learn to say no to the negative thoughts and feelings, just as we say no to a salesperson who's trying to sell us something we don't really want or need. Of course, it's not simple and easy. It does take time and does take practice. But I can say with confidence that it really does work. So this is one thing we need to learn, that we do have a choice about what goes on in our mind. We can keep our mind more positive, more joyful, rather than negative and unhappy. And it's good to check which one is better. If you do have a choice between having an unhappy, miserable, grumpy, negative state of mind or a more positive, joyful state of mind, which one do you want to choose? It seems kind of obvious, but Venerable Chunyi the other day passed on some advice from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's an expert on trauma and the author of The Body Keeps the Score. So he said how important it is at this time of collective trauma from the pandemic that people see friendly faces, that really helps, really makes a big difference. And if you think about it, if our mind is in a negative state, what kind of face do we have that we are looking at others with? On the other hand, if our mind is more positive and happy and joyful, then how does that come across in our face, in our expression, in our behavior with others? And I'm sure we can see in our own experience that seeing friendly, smiling, happy faces really is good for us, really feels good for us. So if that's true for ourselves, it's definitely true for others. So it's good for others if we can have a more positive state of mind. But it's also good for ourselves. A lot of research has been done, and it shows again and again that positive states of mind like joy and optimism and gratitude and kindness are good for our health. They help us to be healthy and live longer, and negative states of mind are bad for our health and our ability to live long. So if we look at the two choices that we have, a negative state of mind or a positive state of mind, I think we'll probably accept that it's better to be more positive. So then, if we do want to change our mind to more positive ones, how do we do that? There's lots of methods, tons of methods in the Buddhist teachings, the Lam Rim, the Lojong, Shantideva. Actually, for me personally, one of the things I find most helpful is this verse by Shantideva, which goes something like, there's never any good reason to be unhappy or worried about anything that happens. Because if there's something that we can do, like there's a remedy we can apply, then we should do it. On the other hand, if there's nothing that we can do, then it's better to accept it. Because either way, letting our mind get caught up in worry and anxiety, unhappy, frustration, and so on doesn't help. Doesn't do any good. In fact, it just makes things worse. So if we can see that, and if we can see there's a solution that we can apply, a remedy that we can try, we should do it. And if not, it's better to accept it. So instead of focusing on the negative side of things, the problems, the things that just make us unhappy, it's better to focus on something positive, something that we can do. For example, helping others. There's always things we can do that are beneficial for others. Just yesterday, I read an account of a visit by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Italy. And at one point, he was in the middle of this crowd of people who were greeting him with katas and so on and so forth. And this small elderly woman with a really tormented expression on her face pushed her way through the crowd and came right in front of His Holiness and knelt down in front of him. And she was crying and just looking really miserable. And she asked him, "What am I to do with this life of mine?" And His Holiness knelt down beside her and took her hands in his, and he said, "Find someone to serve. Find someone to serve." And at that, the woman became calm and relaxed, and her face kind of lit up with joy and contentment and confidence. So definitely turning our attention away from me, and my problems and focusing more on others. I mean, it doesn't mean we have to help the whole world. But there's always people in our small world, our family, our friends, our neighbors, animals, always beings around us who are in need of help. And just putting our attention on them and doing what we can to help them will definitely bring more joy and contentment in our own minds. And so for some people, the Lamrim teachings, the Lojong teachings might be too advanced or too challenging for whatever reasons. But there's lots of other sources of these kind of pieces of advice on how to make our mind more positive and joyful, like other spiritual traditions and psychology and so on. And I really want to recommend this book in case some of you haven't heard of it. It's called The Book of Joy. And just reading it is a joy because it's an account of a one-week meeting that took place between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu flew to Dharamsala to be with His Holiness on his 80th birthday. And they spent a week together talking. And sometimes it was kind of serious talks about, joy, how to have more joy and less unhappiness. But they also had a lot of fun together, a lot of joking, a lot of eating. So, and that's what they were focusing on, how to overcome the obstacles to joy, things like fear and stress and anger, the things that stand in the way of our being able to be joyful, and then how to have more joy in our life. And they came up with what are called the 8 pillars of joy that include things like gratitude, humility, and humor. So this is a really good book for anybody, whether you're Buddhist or if you have family, friends, people who may not be quite ready for an in-depth Buddhist book. This is a really, really beautiful one. Okay, so I'll continue in future BBCs with other methods for having a more joyful mind. Thank you.